and kind of over the top, but I also like have to find the rationale behind all of it, like in a very Tolkien sort of way. Like I have to know like this is this and this is this, like, and not even like for the players, and it may never even end up in the campaign book, but like
it's for you.
I have to know.
Yes.
Like it has to make sense to me.
There's like things where like it's really weird. I'm such a mess with stuff like that, because there are some things where I'm like, no, I want to work out how this is and how does this economy affect this, and if these sky cities are flying all over the place, well then wouldn't they build settlements along the paths, and I'm figuring all this out, and then another part of my brain will go like, I want giant mechs. I don't know, I'll figure it out. I'll just be like, I'll make them work somehow. And then it's just, you know, just because I want them. So yeah, it's always fun to try and figure it all out as well.
I think I would enjoy myself in your campaign a great deal.
It doesn't help that I've been watching and playing like tons of mecha stuff recently, so it's just all in my brain where I'm like, I need giant robots. I need the giant. How can I make giant robots? I get
inspired so quickly. Yeah, I get deeply inspired. Just even with like the Venom movie coming out, I'm like working on a subclass that kind of encapsulates that. That's constant. Man, creating that balance for creating your own subclasses, though, when it gets to the rules, I sweat. Like,
really?
I feel no. When it comes up to like creating balance and creating your own subclasses and making sure that's fair and balanced, and that is one thing that I always think is going to be easier in my brain, and then I start doing it, I'm like, oof. Then again, I mean, D&D isn't always about balance, right? It's not a PvP game. It's
and this is the thing. I do a lot of homebrew stuff, and I've put a few things on DM's Guild, and I've definitely come to the realization that, first of all, homebrewing stuff for your own game, it doesn't matter if it's balanced, because you can tweak it and you can say to the player like, hey, I got this kind of a bit wrong, we need to change this, and you know, that's just part of it. And if you're not publishing it, then it doesn't matter. As long as your group are having fun, then that's the most important thing. But even if you do look at publishing things, at the end of the day, it's people's choice. And you know, if a player likes something, they take it to the DM and say, hey, can I play this? And the DM says no, then that's fine. That's up to that group. You know, that's the way they want to play. And it's so easy to get bogged down in the like, is this balanced? But the hardest thing, I think, is just making something fun, because you can make something, you know, balanced and it can just read very dryly and be kind of boring and samey. And that's definitely a problem I had when I was making some of my early stuff for like homebrew, you know, classes and races and subclasses, is you go too safe, because the most fun stuff is the stuff that is going to be a little bit unbalanced and it is unusual. But sometimes that's okay. As long as the group's still having fun, my philosophy is then it's okay. It doesn't matter. So you should definitely try and do more, because it adds a lot. Like being able to give a player like, hey, here's a super cool, unique subclass because of this idea you had. Do you want to switch to this? They freaking love it. I've had so many people like say, I gave out the one for Erois I've done, which is a sorcerer subclass based on using color as magic. And I've had so many people like request it and ask to play with it. I've gave it out on my Patreon and to a few other people. And now people are coming back, you know, really, really enjoying it. And it's helped me balance it further as well. Like getting that play testing information makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're learning on the fly. You're seeing the mechanics of it work. And I think if I think I would love to do a stream where I do actually all homebrew and see how that plays out. You probably learn a lot really quickly about.
Yeah, for sure.
And
you can start off quite easy. Like I know when I first started doing a few things for like subclasses and stuff, it's looking at the other subclasses and just saying, okay, well, I can take this mechanic from the Storm Sorcerer, but I can reflavor this bit and tweak in this little bit, swap a few spells out, and it's, you know, that way it's still going to be pretty balanced. It might not be perfectly balanced.
Yeah,
but
that's where I go too. Yeah, that's absolutely. I always look at another ability and then I try to like I know slots in, like you know, at like 6th level, and then you can 14th level.
Yeah, and then you experiment and tweak with the weirder stuff, the stuff that isn't covered by anything else, and you can just be like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and tweak it around.
That's great advice for anyone who's looking at homebrewing, I think. Yeah, start with the people who've already done a ton of work.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah.
For you, like Jeremy Crawford has already poured blood, sweat, and tears.
Like looking at like watching a lot of Mike stuff as well, like Jeremy and Mike when they were doing like the streams on like building your own classes, all that kind of stuff. You know, looking at things on DM's Guild, like going on there and looking at like top, you know, character resources, download, buy those 3 things. Oh, I see how they've done that, and I see how they've done this, and how they've used this kind of idea and stuff like that. And it just is then it just becomes doing it and doing more, as much of it as possible.
Now we actually have a question from the audience. Sure. They were wondering, do we ever find ourselves taking it too easy on the players, and how do you adjust from there?
That's an interesting one.
Go ahead.
How would you? So for me, it's one of those ones where, and I think this is a streamer's problem. This isn't a problem as a DM. This is a stream problem. Whenever I have felt that I've been going too easy on the players, you know, you see Twitch chat or YouTube comments like, you know, it's taking it too easy. These fights are too simple. They're, you know, blah, blah, blah. They're not being challenged. I'm like, okay, yeah, I kind of agree. I think that there's definitely a point there where I need to kind of up it. And then you kind of turn it up a notch. And then you destroy and decimate the party, and they're super stressed, and they're like, oh God, they barely get out by the skin of their teeth. And then the next thing is like all the comments and the Twitch chat is just like, he's way too harsh. Oh my God, he's going to kill them. This is he wants them to die. He's out to kill all of the players. And it's like, no, I just want them to be challenged, and I can't. It's hard sometimes because I've gone into fights where I'm like, okay, level 4 party, I'm going to put them against a CR7, CR8 solo monster with legendary actions, legendary resistances. This is going to be a brutal fight. It's going to be really, oh no, they've beaten like 4 rounds. Like, oh my God, what happened? Because the dice were bad or their dice were good or whatever.
Right.
And then equally, you put them in a fight which is, you know, a medium encounter by encounter difficulty ratings, and they get absolutely demolished because they make the wrong decisions or the dice are bad or whatever. And it just swings and roundabouts. It's so hard to judge. And I think that is definitely something that can sometimes be quite a hurdle for new GMs as well, because, you know, I've been playing for like nearly 20 years or something like that, and I still struggle to get it right sometimes. And I think for new GMs coming in, you know, that can be a huge hurdle. Like, there's so many stories of people that like, oh, I ran my first game and I wiped the party completely. They still had fun, but like, I don't know, you know, there's so many stories like that. That I think it can be quite a tricky thing. I don't know about you. I don't know if you have any solutions, because I definitely want to hear them.
No, it is something that you develop, I think, over time, almost instinctually, and it is kind of like it's almost like it's not improv, because like I'm very used to improv, but it is knowing. It's like some part of your brain is doing the math in your head. It's like that gif of like A Beautiful Mind where like he sees all the numbers in the air or something like that. Like you just learn to kind of sort of feel where combat may go. But there have been times like I knew I shouldn't save a player, right? And also because the rules forced me. Like I literally had a situation where this giant owl grabbed one of the players, and he was in the air, and I told him that he was like 100 feet in the air, and they shot the owl. Mm-hmm. They did massive damage to the owl, and he let go. Unsurvivable. Like he could not survive by the rules, and yet he gladly made a new player, because you know what, when you earn a death, you earn a death. So and having consequences is important.
Yes, that 100%, and I fully agree with that. And it's one of those things, just because I saw a few people in Twitch chat, to clarify on one thing, I think a lot of people make the assumption of like, you go in with a very set idea of like, you know, this encounter is going to be this hard or this encounter is going to be that hard. And generally what I try and do is I just try and make encounters fit the situation. So if they're in like, you know, a small outlying town, you know, the local guard aren't going to be particularly powerful. That's just a random example, right? Exactly. I try and make it sure that it fits the scenario. Like if they've been hearing stories about how dangerous the wood is, I'm going to put high level monsters in there because to represent the world that you're creating. The other side of things as well for me is I know it varies on the group of players. I know that I have a couple of players in my group who get very like uncomfortably stressed at the thought of their character dying, and it would be a huge deal if I were to kill their character off. And I still don't want to remove that risk from the consequence for it, but I know that that's something I need to keep in mind, that, you know, they don't necessarily enjoy the very hard combat fights. And so it's that delicate. Whereas I also have players who love that stuff, and they're like, you know, they want to try and do all the cool tactics and find the right balance, and will sit there and cackle when their players, like, they're rolling their second death save. They'll be like, ha 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 ha, ha, rolling death saves. I'm like, that's me. I'm that player. But I know that other players don't necessarily enjoy that. So it's always trying to find that balance of things. And I think you're right. It comes down to the consequence of making it as genuine as you can, as best as you can, and getting a feel for it.
I can't say that I've genuinely felt regret at making things a little too easy before, which is strange because I felt like it kind of undermines your own story, and it kind of peels back it peels back the curtain a bit when things are easy. But I do agree, like it doesn't need to be Skyrim where every encounter is scalable. The town guards don't always need to be on par with you.
Yes, like 100%.
Yeah, sometimes a fight is an easy fight, and sometimes, more importantly, an encounter is not winnable. And sometimes conveying that to players, especially new players, is a difficult thing. Like, just because I put a red dragon in front of you doesn't mean you walk up and talk smack to it, right? Like, you don't, you don't like pick a fight with the dragon.
I will hit you with the stick if you keep prodding me, kind of deal.
Yeah. Don't put me in a situation where I have to kill you, kill your player, your player character, because there becomes like a role playing moment, and that's the other thing I think that kind of ties into this is when someone role plays to the point where you have to have a consequence, where like, okay, well, now the fight begins, or you get put in prison, or maybe you even die. But you made those choices, and I think that's a big part of that balance.
Massive part of it. And I've tried to make sure that I encourage my players, and I think that they do know that. I think it's just it was funny you talking about the whole idea of unwinnable fights, and players like knowing, like, you know, when to and when not to back off and things like that. There's a funny story in our very first campaign, about halfway through, keeping in mind that about half the group hadn't really ever played D&D before. So we'd been playing for about a year, or maybe, you know, slightly less, about 9 months. But they didn't know all the monsters. They didn't know, you know, about all the mechanics and spells and things like that that can exist in D&D. Whereas the other half watched things like Critical Role and had played D&D before. And they went into some chamber in an old ruined temple, and I described, you know, a creature floating in the middle of the room with a central eye and 4 eye stalks with smaller eyes on it. And I knew it was a spectator. I knew it's like a CR5, CR6, perfectly reasonable encounter for them. But the players that only half knew D&D, and the players that kind of knew D&D a little bit, were like, it's a beholder. We can't possibly fight this thing. We're dead. And they were terrified of this thing. And so when it started speaking to them and being absolutely lunatic crazy, they were like, whatever it says, we're going to agree to it. We're going to do whatever it says, because this thing will kill us. And so I just played with it. And the best thing is, I had one player, Matt, who was playing a warlock at the time. He had no idea. He didn't even know what a beholder was. And so he's like, why are you not letting this thing fucking talk to you this way? And he's like talking back to it. And they're like, no. And they're like trying to shut him up and like pull him away. And it was one of those moments where, as a DM, I was just sat there like, and this is why players get themselves killed half the time. Because they don't even like... no idea what it was, and it was just that nice reversal of the classic, like, I'm gonna put a scary monster, oh, you want to fight it? Okay, this time it was like, I'm gonna put a normal monster, oh, okay, you guys are terrified, all right, fine, let's play this through. So yeah,
that's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, because how can you, I mean, especially like when it comes to like humanoid NPCs, you don't necessarily know what level they're playing at.
There's no idea. Exactly.
Yeah, I think I often make the mistake of like having like, oh, you see like the generic wizard with the long beard, but who for some reason is only 3rd level.
Yeah, exactly, right? Think about how hard magic would be. Yeah, well, think how hard magic would be. The fact that players rocket up in levels in like months. You know, I always try and have it like, you know, the highest level magic user in like the capital city or something is like can cast 6th level spells, and it took them 50 years to get there. And then the player characters rock up and they're like, we've been adventuring for 8 months. I'm 20th level or whatever. And magic's dumb. I love it, but magic is dumb.
Yeah. Certainly, the players are the exception. I always sort of try to remember that they're the exception to the rule.
Yes,
for a lot of things. I kind of like the other thing. I try to remember that hit points don't mean you get hit. Also, that's one thing. Sometimes I because I missed. There are other systems that don't say hit points as much as I can't think of like an example right
or
now.
Something like that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, vitality. To convey like, okay, it's still a miss, sort of, or it dings on your armor or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree. Now that you've had some time, and this is what I like about you is I instantly globbed onto you at a party. I think you globbed onto me as well because you and I both have a lot of anxiety in general.
Yeah,
it was, and you like immediately you came over to me and talked to me about dungeon mastering, and that was like delightful.
Yeah, it was. I remember because there was two instances. There was the D&D Beyond like mixer event, I think. There was that where we kind of got to briefly chat, and then it was at the Stream of Many Eyes backstage, and there was so many like LA confident, charismatic people all just going around talking with each other, like, wow, hey, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you, and all this kind of stuff. And I was there by myself. Like, I knew a few people, but it was kind of like very, I'd spoken to them over Twitter or something like that. And it was just that awful thing of just, oh God, I just don't know anybody and I don't know how to approach anybody. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, hey, Todd, great to see you kind of thing. And I think we were both at this point of like, just like so terrified of everything that we could kind of bond over it. So
like the two guys with drinks in their hand at prom, just like just trying to get through
standing
the night.
At the back. Yep. It was definitely that vibe.
That was, but it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad we got to like share a lot of war stories about dungeon mastering, and to that point, do you, and I certainly do, get a lot of anxiety still when I dungeon master right before an adventure, especially right before a campaign, and it doesn't matter if I'm live streaming or it's my home game. I get very nervous because I get this fear that people are not going to enjoy themselves, and then with live streaming, now you have that fear that people are not going to enjoy watching your session. Yeah. Do you still get that? And do you have ways that you kind of combat that?
So it's interesting for me in that because I had a theater background, like I was, I wanted to be an actor and I wanted to do theater and things like that. The stage side of things. So the idea of running a game and the audience, that doesn't bother me. In my head, I don't even think about it, and I just have this maybe arrogant assumption of like, I'm sure they'll enjoy it, or some people enjoy it, some people won't, but that's not up to me. I just need to do the best job I can do. That's fine. In terms of running it for the players, then yes, I definitely still get some of it. With my regular group, it took about, I would say 6 to 8 months, and then I was like, okay, I know how these guys play. I kind of know what they're into. I'm pretty sure I can run a game that they're going to have fun with. And I still have that. So I feel like that I've become very comfortable with. But when I have to do things like one-shots or guest appearances, like I just did a one-shot with JP and some other people, that was nerve-wracking. I was DMing them. They were players I'd never played with before, that I'd never run with before. And that I suddenly had that returning fear of like, oh man, I really hope they, that kind of like nervous building, like that, palpitations and just worry, like, are they going to enjoy it? And have I tricked them into thinking that I'm actually some sort of good DM? I'm not. Like that kind of impersonator syndrome comes out. And that still definitely takes hold. And in terms of getting over it, it's one of those tricky things of, I think it just comes down to something I try and tell myself is at the end of the day, very few people GM. And if you're willing to sit in that chair and run a game, most people are going to give you the credit for doing that. And, you may not be perfect, you may not get everything right, but they're still going to enjoy your game because they're not willing to do it. That kind of like, like you're the one taking on the mantle to be the GM, and most people will respect that and try and enjoy your game as best as you can, as they can as you run it. And obviously you might occasionally get some people who are not very nice people and they might not feel that way. But I think most people in general are good, and most people in the hobby will be very considerate of that if you're trying. Because I remember like when I was growing up, nobody wanted to GM. Everybody was terrified of GMing. And I still think that that's a big problem now. So I think anybody that does that, you do get this like respectful kudos of like, hey, you tried. Thanks, man. Thanks for running the game. And that helps sometimes, like that willingness to run for people. And then just, I guess like it's also a little bit of preparation. It's like getting to know people and like finding out what games they like. Like for me, the big thing that I've been telling people like in my streams and stuff is, ask your players what kind of games they're into, what kind of movies they like, what kind of comics they read. Because if you can get a hint of what they enjoy from those things, you can just bring that into D&D, and then you can, slip those things in and they'll instantly go like, cool. And then they'll latch onto the stuff that they already love. And that's an easy win for you. That just takes, a little bit of preparation time. Which we certainly have with being DMs.
Every time you get that moment every time you are able to give that moment to a player where they're like, this is cool. This is the kind of thing I'm into. That builds confidence every single time. And it makes me feel so good inside. And this is why I'm not like anti-player backgrounds, like them building out long player backgrounds, because I can do this myself. And I won't use like 90% of it, right? Or even 95%. And that might even change as we play the game in my head, what my background is. Because after a couple of sessions, it takes a while for me to, it can take a while for you to find your character. But yeah, when you talk to your players and you ask them, like you said, like what movies do you like? What video games? What stories? What do you want for your character? Like, where do you see them going? And then you can, construct a moment and a moment that they so much wanted to sink their teeth into. I don't think there's any better feeling as a DM. Like it definitely is like something you can think about later after the session and feel good about. And I have certainly not felt good after sessions, like where I felt like I don't know that people had fun.
Yeah,
and that's the theater background as well, because I've definitely, when you're in the play, you do it over and over and over again, and you're gonna have a bad night where your acting was terrible.
And sometimes, right, it wasn't even necessarily that you were bad. Sometimes it was just that there were other problems. It was raining outside and the audience had to wait outside, and so they come in and they're in a bad mood, or something's going on in the world that's kind of a bit depressing, or news has just come out. There's so many factors that can lead to it, and it's accepting that you're going to have those times. It might be your fault, or you might have had a part in it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you were wrong in any way. It's just, hey, these things happen. Like, you can have a bad game. It might be that your players come up when they've had bad news, or they've had a really crappy work day or something like that, and they come to the game. And it's not their fault. Like, they want to sit there and enjoy it, and it may be that there's external forces, stopping them from doing it. So I think it's just being willing to have that conversation with them as well. And like, one of the things I've started trying to do now is like just turning around after, like, the day after we play and saying, hey, did everybody enjoy that game? Was there anything I could do better? Or, was there anything you guys didn't enjoy? And then they'll be honest and say like, I really love this thing. And for the most part, it's always the positive. I've never really had them say like, I didn't really like this. But they'll say, I love this thing. And then you go like, cool, I'm going to put more of this thing in there because they like that. So it's that conversation, as you said. And just being easy on yourself. Like, and this is, it's that classic thing of not taking your own advice, right? Like, we're all so hard on ourselves. But the fact is that you're doing your best, and you might not always get it right, but you're trying, and that's what matters. And it's just about running games. Like, that's the biggest thing you can do, is just run games. And the more you do it, the better you'll get, and the easier it gets, and the more confidence you'll build. And the more you'll get those moments, like Todd said, like those moments where you see the players really enjoying it, and that just lights you up, and you'll just be like, yes, this is why I'm a GM. So it's really nice.
Yeah, it's never my story. Like, I love coming up with story, but I will never have a story so on the rails that it cannot be completely destroyed by my players. Like, I will definitely like, okay, this is kind of the path I'm going towards, but I do kind of love a little bit of chaos, and I love player choices causing me to have to adapt to them. Or, like, there are times like where the players just create a pirate fleet, because a bunch of players couldn't make it. So I let these 3 players do whatever they wanted, and it was just like amazing. And then of course they lose like all of it within several sessions. But I do love focusing on the players, and I often feel like they should at least be everyone should be the same fraction of that story. Including the dungeon master. I don't always feel like the dungeon master, like, I know some people are like, here's my grand story and plan, and welcome to it. And that's never necessarily been my thing.
That's not my thing. And I think that it's I mean, I think that especially now that video games are a big thing, like, and I wasn't around. I didn't play in first edition or second edition, and I think that was a big part of those games back then. It was like, I have this story, and I'm going to tell it to you, and it's interactive, and you can go along with it. But now we live in an age where if you want to do that, you can watch amazing movies, you can play amazing video games, you can read novels. Right. You have all of those things available to you. What D&D can give you, what it can give players and GMs, is this experience of, here is a world, here is some cool stories in that world that I've written, but if you don't want to take those stories, we can explore something else that you guys want to do, or you can find ways that your stories meet my stories, and then we can have a really good time together. And I think that that's really the magic of D&D. I've seen a few people talking about the whole idea of, like, you mentioned earlier about like anti-player backgrounds and player backgrounds, and I'd never even really thought of it, because to me, I'd always written backgrounds for my characters. Like, I will always come up with a story of how they got from I'm a kid to now I'm an adventurer. Like, there will always be something in there that's kind of driven that story. But actually, the idea of people just being like, yeah, I don't really have a backstory, I'm going to figure it out as we go. I'm like, whoa, it blew my mind in the idea of, like, they could take something that the DM's doing and say, like, that's really fucking cool. I want to, how can I be involved in that? You know, and they'll take it on, and they'll be like, yeah, I want to be this emperor's bodyguard, but I've, you know, had to do this thing, and I've been working secretly all along. I'm like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. You know, that kind of stuff to me as a GM would be delightful. Like, any ways that they can either bring their own story into what I've done, or that my story can inspire them to do something. I think that that's so cool.
I think both approaches are fantastic. Like, I will read 5 pages of background from a player. I will absolutely do it. And I will find the things I can make into an NPC and sculpt the story based on that. And maybe it'll inspire me to come up with different ideas. But I absolutely have no problem with someone having no background as well, because I have certainly, especially when you're at a convention or you're just hanging out with friends and you just want to play D&D, you can find that character, and then you start writing a backstory about, like, how, like, just based off your acting, like, why is he acting this way? And sometimes that self-discovery is, you know, just as fun. But I think both work perfect.
Have you done a lot of convention games? Sorry, I was going to say, like, because that's one thing where I never did. I never got to play in convention games or Adventurers League or anything like that. So I'd never even thought of that. That you turn up to those games, and I guess that's a very different experience.
I do have, not until recently, but, and then this has been kind of the joy of that, is I've almost exclusively dungeon mastered for, like, the last, like, 25 years. Like, I have never had really someone to dungeon master for me. Like, 99% of the time it's going to be me. And part of that is also, I do want to do it because sometimes I've had people who are running games where I'm like, oh, but what if they had done this? And that's not a critique on that person who is running the game at all. That's just like, that's like you watching a movie and going, you know what would have been really cool how that movie could have ended. And so that's what got me into really wanting to be a dungeon master. But as a player at cons, or sometimes when you just have one session when you're with friends, I do have some, I like a quick, fast character, and you can find the funniest characters. You can find out things about yourself if you just like I have an arcane archer who's just super cocky and calls himself a bow wizard, and he's just kind of just dumb, you know, like he doesn't even know his own subclass. Yeah. And I have like I played in a game with Jeremy Crawford, and he's called Torvin the Giant Soul Sorcerer, and the tall dwarf. And so he was a mountain dwarf. But he's a giant soul sorcerer, so he was like 7 feet tall, but still had a speed of 25 feet.
Still a dwarf. He's still a dwarf. So for sure.
The rules still applied. And he was like the super vain, because, sorcerers have high charisma. So I made them the super vain sorcerer who, like, when he walked into the bar, he cast Gust of Wind. And there's nothing to that character. There's no backstory.
No, but it's still fun to play.
And so now that cons have come about, I do find myself like playing in those random games. I do have a character I play all the time, which is Avern.
Yes, I've heard you. You told me about.
But his entire existence is based off the fact that he has existed in every edition of D&D, and so that's kind of a joke.
No, I love it though. I'm so envious because I've genuinely had the permanent DM's curse. Like, I don't think until I got to be Kaliana for Critical Role, I don't think I'd played a character in 10 years. It's one of those things where I've always GM'd. I've never had a chance to be a player. And it's only now that I'm getting to be in other people's games. And now I've got things like roleplay and Callie and stuff like that. And now I'm beginning to see that, like, Callie is becoming that character for me of like my precious dragon child that I will now carry around with me forever and will want to play as much as I can. But that sounds amazing. I definitely need to try and play more just to have those like those nonsense characters as well, like those crazy just one-off characters that you come up with.
Well, the next time I see you, I will totally run you on I will totally run you on an adventure. I think that would be bonkers fun, as well absolutely. As like I actually find one-on-one adventures to be quite fun, and I don't know a lot of people
I find them
do it,
hard to do.
I think they're hard to do, but like I've always given, like, I'll run a one-on-one adventure for my wife, and I gave her a character that was essentially called Murderbot, which is like a pile of magical items that had become sentient, and he did some of the tanking, but he was never bright enough to help, and often would not help on accident because he was so dumb.
I love it.
It's delightful because you can't believe how much story you can go through on a one-on-one adventure. Like, you can just go like through a whole movie of plot in a single session. So I do recommend, like, I would love to run a game for you. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, dude. Always.
I got a bunch of questions I've been ignoring, so I should probably be better about that.
Yes. Let's go.
Where do you find inspiration for good moral dilemmas? That is a very good question.
Ooh. I mean, my kind of fallback were like, it's one of those things where I think for like good moral dilemmas, I always will go back to things like, for me, the Mass Effect trilogy. Like, I remember agonizing over many of the decisions there. And whilst it mechanicizes and it's very simplified, right? Like, because at the end of the day, it's a video game. They struck the right balance between that difficult decision of doing what you know is right, doing what you want because it's something you care about, and doing something which is rebellious as well, because there are some people that just want to buck authority. And I felt like that was a great balance between those three things, because really, when you present player characters with those two things of like, hey, you can do what you think is right or for the greater good, or you can do this thing about this thing that you care about. And that can really create a lot of problems for some people, because, a lot of people want to do what's right and they want to do what's good. And then some people are like, nope, I'm 100% doing the thing I care about. They'll just gun for that. So that can be quite interesting. I don't know about you. What about you?
No, you stole it. Mass Effect is a fantastic example. I'll never forget the very first one where there's this alien race that are very much like the Alien, that you can decide just to wipe out. But your choice in not doing so makes them an ally later. And I love that choice, because the safe choice is making sure an enemy can never come back.
Yes. Right? And I think that's actually something, just to quickly jump on, is if you're going to do that in your D&D games, if you're going to offer a choice, it's never you get the good thing, you get the bad thing. It should never be the thing. Both things should have good and bad attached to them. They should both come with consequences and reward, because then it makes them even harder to decide on. And that's what you want. You want the players to be like, I don't know.
Yeah, I always try to provide, for my inspiration, I think, my inspiration often is like, what if I was a bad person? The choices I would make. And whenever I'm writing anything, like, well, even for like books or whatever, or short stories, I do think of like, okay, what would evil Todd do if he was bereft of morality? or even just completely logical, and like, what is that temptation line? I've introduced NPCs who people, they never fought this character till the very last session. After 2 years, never got into a fight with him. But he hired the group to do things. He was clearly a bad sorcerer. They knew he was bad, but he never asked them to do anything bad. And so that relationship kind of grew and grew and grew over time. And it's kind of like, maybe it's like the mob or like any kind of criminal syndicate kind of thing. And you get more comfortable with them, and then one day he asks them to give up one of the player characters, and it was a very good offer. and there was a conversation for maybe an hour.
Oh, wow. Wow. I love it. I love
because there was this greater good that could have been served if only they gave up this other character. And that's the stuff that, I mean, that's certainly like a long-term thing, but I think a lot of spy shows and like criminal element shows are so good about those moral quandaries. And so I find a lot of inspiration from that. But yeah, Mass Effect, fantastic. Fantastic examples of that. Dragon Age Inquisition, an entire village may not exist because of a choice you made. Which I think is a little heavy-handed. You don't want to like.
It doesn't always have to be this huge stakes. Yeah.
Yeah, I have absolutely made the mistake of laying too much devastation at my players' feet. For making a bad choice. And because that can ruin a character. They can no longer enjoy that character because, like, okay, I did this thing that killed like 100 people, like inadvertently, but like. I don't know that not everyone wants to roleplay that.
Exactly, and it's I've done a similar thing of I did a similar thing with a reward where it was like, hey, you can get a really, really powerful reward from this thing, but it's going to change your character. And the person who ended up using it, I hadn't realized how important that character's identity was to the player. And that's something you need to be very aware of. And it's something where, again, that communication with the group is good to know. But you're right in that you don't want to go too heavy-handed. And also, sometimes they're not the best. They're not the most agonizing decisions. Like, for me, it's always the things that are, the more personal. The idea of like, hey, this NPC that we've been allies with for absolutely ages, we can either, save their life, or we can do this other thing, which we know is not necessarily even save their life, maybe just like we can screw over their career and we'll gain something from it. We'll get the location for somewhere that we need to go. And it's like, if we do this, you're going to screw this person over. And, there's no immediate consequence to that, but those can be heart-wrenching because it's something the players actually care about. Wiping out a village that they don't necessarily know or care about, it won't matter to them. But if it's something that they genuinely love, even if it doesn't have any value, it still creates that drama. So
that moral quandary, you're right. Like, there's no like monetary loss or loss of life, but this person that you have an emotional attachment to is hurt. This NPC character that the DM created, you're like, I'm going to feel guilty about that. Forever. Like, and that I, as a player, have made decisions based off how charming, like, I was in it when I wasn't DMing Heroes of the Veil. Averin is a trickster. So he convinced this very naive character that TJ Storm is playing, named Keen, who is from the Feywild, that if you put your gold in the ground and bury it, it'll grow a money tree. And so he believed me.
Yeah, of course.
With absolute abandon. And it made my character feel so bad about like tricking him that I put gold into that hole. So that he was rewarded for his trust.
He got his thing back. Nice.
And you're right. Making NPCs that you get an emotional attachment to, I think, is like a fantastic way of introducing something that isn't necessarily as high stakes, but just as difficult to deal with. Let's see what the next question is. What do you both think about new characters with no actual backgrounds at start? I saw some. Oh, we already talked about this. We covered this. But yeah, already done.
Nailed it.
Can we get a closer look at the art in the background? The Kaliana art in the background?
Oh, yeah. So I've got some Kaliana art, actually. I'm assuming they're talking about this one, and I've got another one from Victimon. So this is from Sail New, who did this. I bought it off them. So if you're a fan of Kaliana, and then I got another one from Victimon over here. Because I told you, she's become like my super precious dragon child that I must protect.
Oh, that's awesome! I love getting character art. Oh,
it's honestly that was. I remember when because we did the Stream of Many Eyes just after I did my episode as Kaliana, and the whole of Stream of Many Eyes, it was just notifications of like artwork, and I've never had anything like that before in my life. And I still have to this day, I have like folders on my computer of just Kali art, and I save everything I come across because it's every time I see it, I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah, your characters are your babies too. So yeah,
especially when you don't get to play them that
responds.
often. Yeah, that's it. Like when you don't get to play them that often, and when you get to play with such a wonderful group like those guys as well, I think it carries some extra meaning. So
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Let's see. The next question is: do you give bonus XP for good role playing as a reward, or do any other thing to promote good role playing? I can tell you my answer right now is I exclusively do. I don't give experience points for killing monsters. I started out doing that, like a lot of people, and that was kind of the fun sometimes. But I feel like video games give you that, and I'd rather see good role playing. So when I see really good role playing or really a big buy-in to the game and the adventure, I will base experience based on that, or just I'm really just doing milestones at this point.
Yeah.
So
I did milestones for our first Lightfall campaign, and that was more based on the accomplishments that the party did rather than their role play. Now I've moved to it's kind of, excuse me. It's kind of a halfway system between Mike Miles did some like alternative XP systems for an Unearthed Arcana a while ago, and I kind of took some ideas he had with that, and so it rewards players for encounters where they're challenged. So it rewards them for hard or deadly encounters, but not easy and medium encounters, unless they learn something from it. So if I genuinely think like, yeah, you guys learned something from that, I'll give you the XP for it. Also for exploration, so discovering new places, discovering magic items, that kind of thing, I'll generally give them XP for that. In terms of role playing, I've never given XP out for it, but I always try to make sure that good role playing is rewarded with more story or role playing. So if you spend a lot of time to get invested with an NPC, that NPC will come back and give you opportunities or give you things to do or story or something like that. Because that for me feels more organic. It's like, hey, if you engage with the world will engage with you back, and you'll get cooler things to go off and do and more fun story and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would argue. And when it comes to streaming, I tend to keep things a little bit more like everyone's kind of on the same path in terms of experience. But you're right. Rewarding role playing with role playing, I think, is the biggest thing. Or for the consequences for that role playing that you've done.
Yeah, good and bad. Good and bad.
Because that makes the world feel real. Like if you're role playing and you're not affecting your world, then I guess why are we playing? Right? So I think that's a big part of it. Here's a question, and this is interesting because I don't play with anyone who does this anymore. How do you deal with PCs that want to dance on the edge of what they can get away with constantly? I've never had to deal with this before, and I don't just want to punish them constantly. Punishment is an interesting word because there has to be consequence. You go first. It's hard, so I'm like.
I guess for me, it depends on what they mean by dancing the edge of what they can get away with. Because there are in my mind, there are two things that I go to with that, and it's players who dance on the edge of the mechanics of like, I'm going to use this spell, and technically it says that I can do this, so I'm going to blah 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 blah, and they're playing the mechanical min-max strategy game. And then there are the players who are like, I'm going to push the edge of societal laws, cultural laws, what is, social expectations within the game itself. And if it's the latter one, then I just let the world's consequences come crashing down, because you can only do that for so long before you upset the wrong person, or you break the wrong law in the wrong tyrant in the wrong authoritarian country. You can only go that so far without eventually even good people will break. If you upset enough good people, they'll eventually get together and say, we've had enough. This is your last warning, you don't stop, you're going to be in trouble. If it's the former, that is something where I don't have it. I think like if anybody who watches High Rollers will know that we have like a running in joke with one of my players, Kim, who will kind of cheekily do things like, can I blah 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 blah, and I will always try and say, yes, but let's make a check for it or something like that. And I will always say like, let's let the dice decide if you can do that. and I wouldn't expect that this will work again. It's that kind of thing, because I don't want to say no to a creative idea, but if it's really skirting the line of what is scientifically or even remotely possible, then it's kind of like, we'll see. But yeah, that's my view on it anyway.
Yeah, there's certainly a difference between trying to take advantage or break the game and being creative. And I do love creative solutions to combat problems. Combat is not always my favorite thing anymore. And I really do like a short combat session. So like if I always think, Return of the Jedi is a good example. The Ewoks did a lot of work before that battle. I'm not saying they should have won, but there are like traps everywhere and trees falling onto like ATSTs, and there's this madness going on. So if you are preparing for a battle, or you come up with like an inventive idea, or you use Mage Hand to drop a lantern onto some hay and cause a fire and a distraction, or whatever it is,
that stuff's great.
That stuff is fantastic, and I don't feel it breaks the game. But you're right, it is a thin line. I think you as a DM just have to, you got to roll with the punches, and if it does become too much of a distraction at the table, just take your player aside and maybe have like some dialogue about it and explain to them why. Not in an accusatory way, just like we can't always come up with like a giant sneaky. It can't always be this Mission Impossible moment of like, aha, I've come up with a crazy different solution. If you get too far in the weeds on someone's very intricate plan, that stops being fun for the other players. And I think I get the vibe that maybe that's what this question is about.
Yes. And I think that for me is always the crux of it, is like if one player's fun is stopping everybody else at the table having fun, that's a conversation you need to have with that player, because the game is about everybody having fun together, and it's finding ways that everybody can be enjoying themselves. If one player is spending an hour building a Rube Goldberg machine to go through one combat and everybody else is bored, then you need to have that discussion. And I don't know the answer to that solution, what the solution is, but it's just something you need to chat about, basically.
Ooh, well, that's terrifying. Here's a question.
Okay. Wow.
I've never played a pre-made setting because I feel that I need the freedom to build what I want. How do homebrew and pre-made settings compare for you? Really quick, I'll just answer this. The only thing I've run in Ravenloft a few times because I adore Ravenloft, and I've run in Dragonlance. I actually ran through a bunch of the original old school modules back when I was a high schooler. And I love that, but I almost exclusively run in my own campaign setting because of that freedom. And also maybe because I can't memorize a book sometimes.
Yes. I think I am very, very similar in that there are settings I love, like Eberron, for example, and I would love to one day play Dragonlance. Oh my god, that's a dream. I'd want to play in Dragonlance though. But but then for my own if I have a choice, I will make my own campaign setting because of that freedom. That's not to say that the pre-made settings are amazing. They've lasted for years.
No, yeah, that is not a critique of
else. Right, exactly. But for me, like I don't know enough about the Forgotten Realms. It's a struggle for me to run a game in the Forgotten Realms because I don't know enough about it. Whereas my own stuff is all up here all the time. It can only come from here. So I find those a little bit easier to run. But I do think that there is a simplicity. Like I've run a bunch of mini-series for Forgotten Realms, with high rollers. And it does make prep time way easier. I can just go in and Google like, Cromrear, I'm going to look up that now. Okay, yeah, that's what I need to know about that. And it means that you can just jump in and play, and the books have everything as well. If I'm going to run, when I did Dragon Heist, I had everything I ever needed really in that book. So they do make it faster, but the thing with homebrew is I feel more creatively rewarded, creatively fulfilled by making my own homebrew, is what I would say.
And I do absolutely read the settings because I find so much inspiration from them and ideas, and that I wouldn't that I may have never thought of, or I riff off of that. So I do. I mean, I own every setting book there is, and I will read every inch of them. and I naturally absorb that information. So yeah, I can't compare the settings. Ravenloft was huge for me, even as a module back in the day, just because the zombies were different. The zombies' arms would still move, and that made me. And now I do it every time. Every monster I ever have in a campaign, I add something a little off, so people don't know what to expect. If you ever run into a goblin in one of my campaigns, you should run.
Okay,
because
nice.
you don't know what type of goblin it's going to be.
Interesting. So I like that.
So I like that. I like that fear factor. Our show is over. Basically, it is 1 o'clock, so we run out of time. Yep. Oh my God, Mark. Come back. We could talk for so many.
Dude. I will come back anytime you ask me to, man. Like, I love talking about D&D with you because we just talk and it's nice.
Yeah.
So anytime.
It's such a great conversation. You were such a kind-hearted individual, and you totally saved me at that party. I love to. I love to be able to like hide out and just talk about nerdy D&D stuff amongst a bunch of already nerdy people.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Mark Hulmes. Check out High Rollers if you haven't already. It is an amazing show. He is an amazing dungeon master and just an all-around great guy. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, guys.